is, what does love mean in an intimate capacity? Because I had an absent father, so I've always struggled with the love of a man, because obviously I am heterosexual. So I've always been unable to accept love from a man. They always say that your father is the first man that you love as a girl child. And I believe that psychologically you replicate your father in your relationships, or the person that your father is. I knew him personally, but I never had a relationship with him. Yet when the replication psychologically has been that the men that I have had relationships with have been very much like my birth father in characteristics, which I find really bizarre, because I didn't have that direct love from him or even a relationship, but yet I've met men that have been so much like him, emotionally unavailable, lacking emotional intelligence, been selfish with their emotions, quite deceitful. And so for me, I'm still at my age now trying to understand what the next plan is.
You're breaking off a little. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's quite important to say, because not a lot of people understand those dynamics, especially when you're a child. You have no idea how those things kind of impact on you later on in life. But I just want to kind of understand, how does that affect your mental health as a woman, as a straight woman, and having those relationships? Do you find that you've become maybe dependent, or there's some trauma bonding with those people, or do you constantly seek validation? How have you found that those relationships have affected your mental health?
I overthink massively. And that is one of my biggest flaws. I'm always preempting. I'm always overthinking the situation to the point where I've played out both scenarios in my head already. And overthinking is a massive mental health concern, isn't it? Because you're already sabotaging something that hasn't happened in your mind. And it impacts my relationships because I do it all the time. And then the man will get to a point where he's fed up of trying to validate the situation. And I find it difficult to then explain. So then it becomes an issue. And then I start to question my integrity, and I start to question his honesty. I still don't know what it is that I'm looking for. So how do I know if I'm receiving it? I mean, I've been in relationships where the man has told me he loves me endlessly, but I'm like, I don't even know, because I don't know what it's supposed to look like in its true form. So it plays on my mind a lot. And being in a relationship and having a partner that is expressing himself to you in his highest emotional form and you're rejecting it, it's hard.
Yeah, it almost sounds like, because there was that absenteeism from a male figure in your life, you don't feel like you deserve that love. And so in any situation, I guess it's an unconscious pattern that you have. And it's the fear probably of getting hurt, maybe getting too close to someone. Then you become comfortable in your emotions, and then they strike, they leave you. And that fear of abandonment, isn't it? I think there's a lot of concepts you can think about. So it's about learning yourself first, understanding yourself first, learning to manage your emotions at a level whereby you do not depend on how somebody reacts to you or how they treat you, for you to have some sort of self-validation,
Well, I go opposite way, you see, Gertie, because I don't rely on anybody for emotional fulfillment.
Right.
be quite cold, not
Right.
intentionally,
That goes.
but
Right.
I'm very guarded. And it, I also, I've looked into the love languages as well, and physical touch is not mine. And I think that also leans into it as well, because I protect myself so much that I don't realize that I'm doing it.
Mm.
I think
I
that
am aware of it.
that builds on. I think Gina, what you're saying is very important because that builds onto the self-preservation issue. You are
Mhm,
saying that you feel like you all those things, the touching and all that is not you. But that's because you feel like since you haven't had what it is that you think you should have had, you need to protect yourself from getting hurt, from not having it. So
yeah.
this is where it comes in. This is where I think when Getty already touched on what I was going to touch on in terms of if you learn to understand yourself first, that's the cornerstone of actually understanding what you perceive as love. Because in as much as we're given the definitions of love, at the end of the day, it is about your perception of what
Mhm.
you think love is and what your expectation of it is. You can't have something you think the mainstream language has said love is. Ask yourself
Mhm.
who are you, Gina? What makes you feel like you love yourself?
Mm.
That would be the building block of your expectations of what you expect to feel when you're thinking of love, because it starts from within you and it builds up to the outside, that you know yourself, that I love this because this makes me feel this way. I love to be treated like this because this makes me feel this way. And
Mhm.
therefore, my expectation, even though I'm protecting myself from probably getting hurt by trying to seek out that kind of love that I believe in, I still expect that. You set that standard. You don't settle. You expect that I expect to be treated with respect. I expect to be valued. I expect to be heard. I expect to feel wanted because I have introspected and seen that this is what I feel, this is what I know about myself, and this is what I would like.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. And I have learnt that because my last relationship was very toxic. And I came out the other side understanding all of the things that I need and didn't need, and the things that I want and I don't want. And it, I didn't even realize until the end of it or during that I had daddy issues. Because when you have an absent father, you don't think about dad. You don't think about the impacts that dad could have, would have, should have had on your life, because it's not an element that you're familiar with. Um, but I've come to realize that it does play a massive role psychologically, because it's something that I share his gene. So I'm gonna feel something, but I didn't actually put two and two together to actually make it make sense. So in my 40s is when I actually came to realize, and then I had to really go back into myself and think, okay, these are the ages where I missed dad. These are the ages that dad should have been around to teach me. So it has definitely impacted relationships in the past. So, hoping now going forward with a clearer insight, I will get the love that I deserve and need.
Of course.
Mm. Also, I was just wondering, kind of flipping it on its head. You have a male figure present in your life, a father figure, but then the love is still absent. They're there throughout your milestones from birth, going to school, growing up, but there is that detachment. They are never able to show that love. Do you think this thing can be intergenerational? It's coming and stemming from somewhere. And do
Absolutely.
you think it can be shifted along the way? And how would one sort of try to do that? Because as a child, you have very little control over what happens in your environment. And so, and especially for some of us who came from Africa, we had no knowledge about all of these psychological things. It's things that you learn as you get older and you become maybe educated or get exposed to different cultures and different life and all of that stuff. So for the younger people, I guess, or for children who are in environments where they're feeling like there's a lack of love, there's a lack of sort of bonding, how do they kind of navigate that, without that direction? Do you know what I mean? And then there's the cultural thing that you can't express those feelings to a parent and say, I'm feeling this way. I feel isolated. I feel left out. It's quite a big thing, isn't it?
Yes, I come from a Jamaican background, so Caribbean, we have the same thing. And it comes from a man must be a man and a woman must be a woman, and the roles are never switched. So men are raised to be the hard ones. Don't cry, don't show emotion, don't do this, don't do that with your child. But I think the intergenerational curses or traumas are being broken, because my child, my 21-year-old, she's coming for me. And she's saying, Mom, I didn't want gifts. I wanted love. Mom, I didn't want this. I wanted to sit with you. So I'm being forced into that position where I'm having to unlearn what I learned from my mother. And my younger one knows that physical touch is not my thing. But trust me, that girl's pushing her head under my arm. Whether I wanted to or not, she's right there. And she's pushing me out of it. And I don't want it to seem like I'm relying on my children to break them. What my children are doing are showing me a different way. Because they want it and they are more expressive. And I think we are allowing our children to be a bit more vocal. When I was a kid, it was sit down, shut your mouth, and speak when you're spoken to. Whereas I'm like, are you okay? Is there anything that you want to talk about? Are you feeling unhappy, or do you have anything to share? And I think those are the changes that we're making in the Western world and with our generation.
Yeah, I think that's quite poignant, because if you look at our children now, I think there's the level of resilience is very low. The threshold is so low. And you have a lot of anxiety and depression in children. And most of it is coming from, like the home environment, their relationships with their parents, if they feel love is lacking. And, I think in the West, there's a lot of stress. As parents, we're doing so much. And sometimes you just don't have the patience to, not saying it's abuse or anything like that, but you're not giving the child that time, that quality time. And so you may just say something out of turn, and that child already feels rejected a little bit, and I noticed that in this country. Whereas back in Africa, that wouldn't be an issue, because they're taught to be very tough. We were taught to be very tough, to be very resilient. I think this is how we have coped growing up, but our children are very, very almost cotton wool, like, if you like. Yeah.
Do you think that could also be because of the sense of community that they grow up in Africa? Because I think there is that sense of community. They have a lot of cousins, they have a lot of aunts, they have people who dote on them. So even if mom or dad is upset with me today, my aunt so-and-so loves me, my cousin, do you think it's also a societal thing, like it's about community?
It absolutely is. It's not even a thing. It is. It takes a village to raise a child has gone out the window long time ago. I was born here in England, but I can remember being small. It was go to Auntie Maria. Auntie Maria could have been a white lady that my mom used to work with, or it would go to Auntie so-and-so, and it would just be someone that she met and got familiar with. But in those days, there was always another auntie or another family that your mom or your dad would send you to. Or has now, we've safeguarded so much. Not get me wrong, we have to, but it's now, if you go to Auntie Vera's house and you do something wrong, and then she tells you off, you're going back to your mum and Mum, I'm not going back to Auntie Vera's because she shouted at me, and then I'm marching up to Auntie Vera's and I'm giving it one, and we're arguing, and then the relationship breaks down. And that,
So do you
that
feel like, so Gina, do you feel like the actual understanding of love is getting lost even to our children and to generations that are coming in this day and age?
I think I don't think it's getting lost. I think it's a different package. It's being presented differently. These children in today's society want it in every capacity, and they're asking for it and they're demanding it. Whereas I think when you and I were growing up, if mum make us a hot meal and share with us, that was enough. But it's not like that anymore.
Yeah, I think as well, in this generation, our children's generation, it's very much commercialized. There is this influence of, video games and all of that stuff. But then again, you touched about the community, the societal stuff about having friends all over. The weather makes a difference. Kids, we grew up playing outside and stuff like that. Whereas here, yes, it's cold. Kids are stuck indoors. If they're not doing any extra activities after school, they're literally. And then you have some parents who don't invest in trying to make sure their children are doing what they're supposed to be doing, with the homework and stuff like that. That is love. That is a sense of love, because you're trying to instill that hard work early on in childhood. Yeah. And I know some parents do struggle to get their children to do that. It can be quite challenging, but I think if you start very early on, but you also have to think that it's a lot of stress. It's overwhelming. Parents come from work, and maybe for some parents, they work in night shifts. So you have to consider a lot of those things. So you can't just blame parents, but I'm saying those are the things that kind of affect a lot of how some of our children may end up, and some of the influences they get from other children are coming from different backgrounds, Yeah. So yeah, it is quite a complex, because this could be a whole other story for another day.
I think what we're getting from all this is that the environmental, the societal factors, the economical factors, there are a lot of factors that come into understanding such subjects. I mean, mainstream truths have told us that no, this is because of that. But when you actually are looking at it, and as we're dissecting it right now, we're realizing that no, there are other bigger factors which then form this whole thing we're trying to understand. We're trying to understand what love means. And Gina has told us how the absence of a father has got such confounding factors in her life. And then you start to think of that, and then you look at the environment we're talking about, the different kinds of environment in the different continents and in the different upbringings. So all these factors kind of let you know that what you think is not actually that, but that maybe you need to think more broadly and more outside what they would say the normal picture, and see things in all these other factorial lights that we're talking about. And while we're on that subject of love and absent fathers and how that affects us, I think, can we talk about how it is with mothers? Maybe Gertie can talk to us about how the love is in terms of motherly love.
Yeah, I think motherly love is probably the most easiest kind of love to give, as a mother. It's not something you think about. It is something that comes naturally, and it is something that you make sacrifices for, That's why they call it that unconditional love. And the funny thing about it is that when your children are going through the toughest time, you feel that pain. you will literally just strip your clothes and make sure your child is okay. Like, for example, you have your child going to university and they're literally a young adult. They're trying to adjust into this cruel, cold world. You're constantly worrying, trying to baby them. Yes, they may be 18 and they're an adult, but to you, they're your baby. I know lots of women are always like, still my baby, still my baby. But and I think, especially when you have a daughter, they watch. They are impressionable. They get to a certain age where they're quite impressionable. So if you are not a role model for that child, making sure your child understands that your happiness comes first. Because as a mother, if you are not happy, you're not settled, you don't have peace within yourself, you cannot be a good mother. All your frustrations, all your resentments will go to the child. So I think it's so important to look around your environment. What is it that you are providing for your children? What are you giving right now? What do you bring to the table as a mom? Are you showing them that toxicity is okay? Are you showing them that abuse, emotional abuse or physical abuse is okay? So a mother is there to protect. You are the biggest protector for your child, and your child is looking up to you. And you'll hear stories about where children go through abuse from at the hands of their fathers.
Mm.
They grow up thinking, well, mom, where were you? There's this resentment, so much trauma. You were there, yet you turned your head, turned a blind eye. So as a mom, you have to play such a central role for your children. And I think whatever you do, you don't realize your kids pick up on. They're learning those behaviors as they grow up. So for you, I guess I want to understand from you, Gina, in terms of growing up without that father figure, what role did your mom play to kind of make you feel loved? I know you talk about not knowing what love is from a male role model, but from your mom, did you actually then say, well, actually, she did the best that she could, or there was...
It's interesting you say that, because just as you said, that if you as mom, you're not in a good place, it transfers to your children. How do you then be a good mom if you're not in a good place yourself and you have to be a mom?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that affects a multitude of women across the world, because it's presented and packaged as prenatal and postnatal depression, but there could be other traumas that are lying dormant before the baby comes along,
Mm-hmm.
and they resurface, and they are then multiplied with being a mom and all of the challenges that it comes with it. And also, just touching on, you said that the greatest love is being a mom. Some women are not maternal.
Mm.
They have a child, but they don't, I don't want to say they don't love the child, but they feel resentment towards the child before the child's born,
Yeah.
for body changes, for how they feel, or for any number of reasons. And I know for me, in my pregnancies, both of them, I had issues personally with their fathers. So
Mm.
I didn't like being pregnant at all. I didn't have this glowing, oh, I feel great, I'm blossoming. I didn't like it. There wasn't any side of being pregnant that I liked at all.
Mm.
But with regards to my mum was hard.
Mm.
She was a hard Jamaican woman, and she never said I love you. I don't think my mum said the words I love you until I was in my probably mid-20s. She just wouldn't say it. You'd say I love you, mum, and she'd go
Mm.
but then I
Yeah.
understood her reasoning, because she wasn't raised by her mother either. Her mother had her and then dropped her off at her grandmother on her father's side when she was 3 months old, and she never saw her mother again. So
Mm.
I think my mum grew up with a resentment towards her mother for being abandoned, So then my mum raised us girls differently to how she raised the boys. The boys were raised with, oh, my son, and the girls are raised, you must this, you must that, don't do this, don't do that. But I knew she loved me because although it was a single parent household, I always had a hot dinner. I always had clean clothes. We didn't really play games or anything, but we used to sit and watch a couple of TV programs together. She would do my hair. She would always make sure I looked tidy and clean. The important things about being maternal. We didn't have a lot of money and I didn't have the best of everything, but she'd come to parents' evening as well. So there was those things. She invested in me. She let me do a couple of activities. And that was how I understood it to be. But the flip side of that was that I then did that with my girls. And we're talking about material. The emotional side wasn't there.
Mm.
So that's what I learned. And then having my children, I've had to relearn that it's not just about having nice clothes, having nice hair, having nice food. It's about opening your arms and letting them lay on your chest and, sitting with them, having them. My youngest is 11 and she'll still come and sleep with me at times. And I allow it. I enjoy it. It's sweet. But once upon a time, I wouldn't be having that.
Well, those are very strong discussions to have, ladies. And as you can see that there's a lot to be unpacked. But unfortunately, we have to conclude this today. And in conclusion, I'd like to ask the three of you in just brief sentences. Let's conclude this by you telling the audience, what does love look like to you? We'll start off with Gertie, then Gina.
To me, love is unconditional, but it depends in which context. So in a romantic type, it can't be unconditional because you have to be treated well. You have to be treated the way you deserve to be treated. But ultimately, I think it's not gender-based. And I think what's important is having introspect, learning to love yourself first. That's the only way you can navigate this thing called love. If you don't start with yourself, then there's so many hurdles along the way. So, yeah.
Thank you, Gertie. Thank you for that. And Gina, what does it look like for you?
Okay. Love to me, I will read my favorite verse. If it loads, and it doesn't have to be looked at just from a biblical perspective, but the words speak for themselves. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Love never fails. So I'll conclude there.
Thank you. Why did you stop?
Because it went on to say something else about prophecies, and I was like, okay, I don't need to read that bit.
Well, no, thank you very much, ladies. And I think because we didn't introduce ourselves, we were already in this interesting dialogue and we forgot to say who we are. I think, could we just briefly state who we are?
Starting with yourself.
I'm Karen. I'm the one facilitating this talk today. And I'm Karen, and I'm a researcher, and my background is in psychology.
I'm Gina. I'm a mum of two who talks quite a bit and reads very little.
I'm Gertie. My background is in specialist mental health, clinical settings, and I have a master's in healthcare leadership. That's it.
Thank you very much. So as we see how this subject just was so sweet and so short and so nice, we need to unpack it more next week, because today we spoke about absent fathers, we spoke about the love of a mother, we spoke about how it feels like or what it should look like to be loved. But I think the most important point to take from this was that we had an understanding of how all these factors can be looked at according to how we perceive certain things, and that could be the environment or the society we're in or the culture around us. But the bottom line to take as we leave tonight, I think, is that it all starts within you. Love yourself enough inside, learn yourself enough, and that is the building block. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, ladies. See you next week as we unpack the second part of love. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You stop recording.